just, I know it's Bryan wants to be acknowledged. So, just so you know, today is Bryan's birthday. So,
That's true. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I know how much you want me to do.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Rich, and thank you, everyone. Welcome to Westside. We are so glad that you're here. It's been a great day so far. If you're a guest for the first time, we especially want to welcome you and hope that this has been a blessing for you and for your family. And we're just really excited to have the chance to get to know you a little bit. Last week, we started a new series here at Westside called Growing Young. And the idea behind Growing Young is that as time goes on and we as individuals get older and older, the church itself can stay young as we constantly reach out to younger people and include them and lead them and disciple them and train them to be active parts of the church. And so this series, Growing Young, is based off a book by the same title. And the book looked at hundreds of churches across the country that are doing a really incredible job of reaching young people. And what they wanted to find out is, what are these churches doing so right that are allowing them to make a huge impact in the lives of students, college students, young adults, young married couples? What are they doing right? And after doing all of this research, there were sort of like 6 key characteristics that really seemed to stand out among all of these churches. And so with the Growing Young series, we're going to take a look at kind of each of those and what the Bible teaches about them. But before we dive into what those 6 are, I did just want to take a little bit of time to talk about 10 things that didn't make the list. In other words, 10 things that you don't need in your church in order to effectively reach young people. And these are important to keep in mind because sometimes we think young people are looking for one thing when really they're looking for something else entirely. So there was 10 things that really didn't make the list here. One of them was size. It doesn't matter if you're a huge church or a tiny little church. Location was one that didn't matter. It didn't matter if you're in a big city, little city, rural. There's no particular location that you need. Same goes with the age of the church. How long has the church been around? Has it been here for years or decades or centuries? Or is it brand new? Is it a new church plant? Didn't necessarily need a huge budget to spend, just thousands and thousands of dollars on, different productions and entertainment and things like that. The budget didn't seem to have a huge impact. Churches that grew young, they didn't even necessarily have contemporary worship. Churches came from all different backgrounds with different liturgical styles and singing styles, and their worship services were kind of all over the map. You didn't need to have a church that sort of watered down the teaching and said things in super overly simplistic ways in order to reach young people. They were really craving deep spiritual teaching instead. Churches don't really need to have a hyper entertaining culture where there's lights and laser tag on stage and things like that. It's really just the simplicity of it is fine too. There was no one denomination or lack of denomination that seemed to make a difference. Your church didn't need to have like the ultra hip, ultra cool, skinny jean wearing pastor. It's really, you could just be like a normal average church and that's okay too. And then the last but not least is just a huge building. We might think that younger people are attracted to the Disneyland churches where it's brand new and everything is modern, and everything is just incredible and unique, but none of these things really made a huge difference when it came to how the church was able to reach out to young people. It was really 6 key characteristics of the church itself. And it seemed like it really had more to do with the heart and the character of the people that are part of the church rather than anything on this list. So the 6 things that really stood out when it came to reaching young people were instead keychain leadership, which is what we talked about last week. It's the idea of entrusting young people with the authority and the authority to lead, giving them permission, giving them training to be active parts of the church right now. And we got to hear a really incredible story of how God had called some high school students and college students to start a brand new church at Cal State Bakersfield, reaching out to college students with the gospel. And these are all high school seniors, college students who are leading this church and sharing the gospel there. And I think that was incredible. So that was the first one. The second one is empathy, taking Jesus seriously, warm relationships among the church, prioritizing young people, and being the best neighbors. So those were the 6 things that really seem to make a huge difference for churches that are reaching young people. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that second one, empathy. There's a quote out there that I've heard at youth ministry conferences and in youth ministry books, and maybe you've heard it or something similar before. It says, people won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Now, different people are credited as saying this. Maybe it was Teddy Roosevelt, maybe it was John Maxwell. But regardless of who said it, the truth behind it is rock solid. You could have the most amazing mentor or spiritual example in your life, with years and years of experience, with 1 degree after another, an expert in the field. But until you're convinced that they genuinely care about you and know you and want what's best for you, until you know how much they care about you, it's going to be hard to follow their example and trust them and really connect with them on a deep level. So you can have the best and the brightest mentor out there, but empathy is going to be the key to that relationship. And so that's kind of where empathy comes in, and that's where we'll launch off today. I think empathy as an abstract idea is a good thing. Even if you just talk about, should we be empathetic people? Yes, because it's the right thing to do. But when we talk about empathy from a Christian point of view, there's sort of a missional aspect to empathy that's really important. There's an evangelistic side of empathy that can be extremely important in reaching young people. And so when we talk about empathy, we're talking about it in terms of if you have it on your heart to make a difference in someone's life, if you have it on your heart to help someone connect with God and grow in their faith, empathy is the key to leading other people, and especially young people, into a deeper relationship with God. And so we believe that God has provided through his word and through Jesus Christ some of the best answers to life's biggest questions. And we believe the gospel of Jesus Christ is the most transformative message that there is out there. The biggest gift that God has given is the gift of the gospel. And yet we can't really take that message to people unless we connect with them emotionally, see life from their point of view. And so empathy is the key to connecting the people of this world who are often hurting and lost and wondering, what is life all about? To God, who has given us those greatest answers to life's biggest questions. Empathy is the way that we as the church can sort of bridge that gap. So if you want to make a difference in someone's life, and especially if you're thinking of it in terms of leading someone into a closer relationship with God, it all starts with empathy, connecting with others emotionally, experiencing life from their perspective, and walking alongside them on their journey. To me, those things kind of capture what it means to live with empathy. In the book of John, chapter 11, you can start turning there if you like in your Bibles. Jesus gives us a really powerful example of empathy during a time when some of his closest friends were experiencing a deep tragedy in their lives, the tragedy of losing a loved one. And that's something that many people in this room have had to walk through, maybe even pretty recently. And so Jesus was visiting his friends at this moment of deep sorrow and tragedy and grief. Jesus' friend Lazarus had fallen ill, and it was a really serious illness. Lazarus had 2 sisters that Jesus was also very close to, Mary and Martha, and he loved them with all of his heart as well. When Jesus arrived in the city of Bethany, where this family lived, Mary came running to Jesus in deep sorrow, with tears just pouring down her face, because Lazarus had just passed away. So that's what we'll pick up in John chapter 11, verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. And shortly after that, the stone is rolled away, and Jesus performs an amazing miracle for Lazarus. Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead, and Lazarus was alive and joyful and walking around and experienced that new life again, the way that any of us can come to God, or the way that God has come to us and speaks new life into our struggles. When we feel dead in our sins, or we're at a dead end, we can come to God, and God gives us new life and a second chance. And I see that empathy is really a central theme in this story of Jesus ministering to this family. 2 times in this short passage, it talks about how Jesus is deeply moved. It's a description of deep anguish in his soul. Jesus knew from his perspective how the story would start and end. He had sort of God's divine perspective on everything. And in fact, before they even came to Bethany, Jesus was talking with his disciples and said, look, Lazarus is asleep. He's going to be okay. It's not going to end in death. Jesus knew everything was going to work out okay. And yet in that moment, he still chose to connect with Mary and Martha emotionally. And he chose to go through that experience from their point of view. Knowing that everything would be okay in his mind, he still experienced it as if it was happening to him, and that led him to this deep anguish, this deep sorrow in his soul, and it moved him to tears. And so he was so in tune with the pain and the grief and the struggle that they were experiencing that he felt all of those same things himself. And you notice him walking with Mary and Martha to the tomb, walking with them as they went to go confront this source of grief and pain and trauma. And so God never promises that we get to avoid all of the bad things in our life, but we see over and over that when we face into those struggles, God is with us and Jesus walks with us. So I think this is a really great example of empathy. Jesus spent time connecting with the emotions of Mary and Martha, experiencing this moment of their lives from their point of view instead of his own, and walking alongside them as they lived this struggle and lived this tragedy. So I think that's a great example of empathy for all of us to follow. So when it comes to reaching young people, I really think empathy is key. And so we know that God gives us the gospel and provides answers to all of life's biggest questions. And we know that people are searching for something and hurting and wondering, what is faith all about, and what is God offering me? And so there's this chance for us to be a mediator and bring these lost and hurting people into a deeper relationship with God. And yet the problem is that for many young people, religion is a source of frustration or anger in their lives. There's a passage in James that I wanted to read, and it says, "Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters," James 1:19. "You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry." This is a passage in James talking about the way that we as Christians need to live. And I think that the experience that a lot of young people have with religion is sort of the opposite of this. So I think a lot of people, they've had angry people talking down at them without ever taking the time to listen to their story. And that's their experience with religion for a lot of people. And so if you have had an experience with the church or with faith or with Christianity, if you've had an experience with religion where you felt like people have been overly critical, if they've judged you since the moment you walked in the doors, if you felt turned off to the idea of God because of the way that Christians were acting, we just want to say we were wrong. And we should have never treated you or spoken about you that way. Because what we read in the Bible is that God does not want us to judge people to Jesus. At Westside, we're all about loving people to Jesus. And we know that this passage is teaching us to live with empathy and patience. And so when we know that many young people have this really negative experience with religion, it just underscores how important it is to connect with today's young people emotionally, to walk alongside them in their journey, and to experience life from their point of view. And if we want to be able to do that with young people, if we want to walk alongside them and to know their world, there's 3 things that we really need to keep in mind about what their lives are about and the things that they're thinking through. The book Growing Young talks about 3 ultimate questions that most everyone is asking, no matter their age. 3 questions are, who am I? Which is a question of identity. What defines me most? What can I write down on paper that sort of proves that I'm a valuable person, that proves who I am? Sometimes we define ourselves by our relationships with family or our career or what sport we're part of or hobbies that we do. But that question of identity is one of those deep, ultimate questions that people are asking. Another one is, where do I fit? The different relationships that I have. Where do I belong? Where I feel loved and accepted unconditionally. What group can I be a part of that's going to value me and miss me when I can't be there? So where do I fit? Question of belonging. And the last one is, what difference do I make? Because no one wants to live their entire lives and feel like they never made any impact or any difference in the world. So what am I doing here? What's my purpose? And so what difference do I make is that question of purpose. Now, all of us, regardless of our age, wrestle with these questions. It's just that as we get a little bit older and more established in our families, in our career, as we get established, financially, we're independent, these questions tend to be sort of on a slow simmer on the back burner. And we're not constantly wrestling with, okay, who am I and where do I fit and what's my purpose? Because as we get older in our careers and we get more independent, these answers are a little bit more settled. And so it's a slow simmer. And sometimes these, kind of bubble up and we feel insecure about our relationships, or we have a career change, or we lose a job, or something happens that kind of brings one of these into a sharper focus for us. But for young people, this isn't a slow simmer on the back burner. This is at a constant boil. And every single day, they're wrestling with, who am I and where do I belong and what difference do I make? And the really challenging thing is that, young people are trying to figure out all of these deep questions, these life-changing questions about who they're going to be and what their future looks like, when they have virtually no free time to explore these things because of everything else that they have going on in their lives. So we're going to illustrate this a little bit. I've asked some different volunteers to come up. So if I talk to you about being a volunteer, go ahead and come up right now. We've got two of our high school students, some of our older students as well are going to come up and help out with that. So yes, this is wonderful, wonderful. All right, so I'd like to introduce you to Gallie and Kathy. They are freshmen at Liberty High School, mostly. Are we at Liberty yet? Okay, we're working on getting to Liberty High School. So we got freshmen. We have some of our youth ministry volunteers here as well. So let's just visit this table right back here. I'd like to have our volunteers our older volunteers, start blowing up these balloons, okay? So I'll have you guys start working on that. That's a bit of a curveball. And then our high school students, come right down here, all right? So I just want to briefly talk to you guys as they're blowing up the balloons back here. I know how busy life is as a high school student. I know that on top of your just average everyday life of everything that you need to do, there's school and homework and sports and relationships, friendships or dating relationships. You might have to go to a job. There might be family drama or trauma going on behind the scenes. I know that a lot of students are facing things like mental health issues, facing addictions of various kinds. And that's not to say you two are experiencing all of these things, but just the average high school student has a lot on their plate. And we also know that there's big things going on like, well, what college am I going to go to? And what kind of career am I going to have? And so you have all these different things swirling around in your minds every day, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for this kind of stuff. And so I know that can get really, really challenging. So on top of just and I'm sure you also want to do things like have fun, right? And sleep and eat and all that too. So we have these three big questions going on that high school students and college students and young adults are trying to wrestle with. And yet it's hard to really focus much time on those because of everything else that's going on top of that. And so what ends up happening is that high school students, college students are feeling so overwhelmed by the amount of stuff going on that they feel like they don't have a great chance to sit down and explore some of life's biggest questions, all right? And so usually what ends up happening is that they've just got a lot of things to try and juggle all at once, right? So how are we doing with our balloons? 911, why? What's wrong? All right, come on over here. All right, come on over here. So high school students. So we're going to give them a lot of different balloons, and each balloon is going to kind of represent one big area. So let's kind of face this way a little bit so they can see your bright, shining faces. And so we know that you guys have like big things like school and sports. So you're just going to, let's just give them all of the balloons. Let's just see how many they can hold right now, okay? So just try and get them to hold all of them, as many as you can. And so we're just going to pile on, like, oh, here's 8 hours of homework every night, and here's a part-time job that you're supposed to do. So here you go, congratulations with that. Make sure and hold that. Maybe you've got a friendship. Maybe there's like a boy or like a band that you're really interested in, so that takes up a lot of time too. And all right, so seriously, try and just hold all of them. That'd be great. If you can try and hold about 6, that'd be fantastic. Okay, so, all right, now face the audience because they want to see what you guys are doing. All right, they want to face the audience. All right, here you go. Good. All right, perfect. Just try and hold as many as you can. This is what life is like as a high school student. Okay, now you don't always just get to stand still because you're supposed to be doing stuff. You're supposed to be busy, right? So you got like a lot of balls to keep up in the air at once. So just try and keep all 6 up in the air at once, and we'll just kind of watch you. And then while this is happening, usually like the stance of the church sometimes as Christians is we just kind of sit back and watch and go, man, you guys are totally irresponsible. You just dropped that one. How come you're not working hard enough, man? Like, how come we don't see you at church that much? And even if we did show grace, it's, hey, you guys should come to church. Like, hey, Gala, tell me about your favorite thing about Jesus. And it's so hard to like have meaningful conversations when you got all this other stuff going on. And so what happens is as the church sits on the sidelines and kind of watches them struggle, they kind of get the message that we don't really care about entering into their lives. We're just sort of watching on the sidelines. And so empathy is all about stepping off the sidelines. And so what we'll do now, since we have all of these youth ministry volunteers right here, let's see if we can keep all of them in the air as a team, all right? So instead of just them, let's kind of share the load here a little bit. I'll take this one, and you take that one. And we'll just see, can we keep these as a team up in the air? Now, there is air conditioning on, so that's a little bit harder. But you see, when the church kind of works together a little bit, instead of leaving it all to one person, and it's still not perfect, instead of leaving it to one person, we get a little bit better, and it's a little bit easier, and we take some of the burden off them. And so we create space for them to be able to maybe focus on other things. All right, let's give all of our volunteers a big round of applause. You guys can keep your balloon as a souvenir of this incredible moment. Actually, do me a favor. Can we grab them off the stage here? Because that'll be really distracting for me. All right, here you go. Enjoy. Thank you for being a volunteer. I appreciate you. So that's got a little bit of an image of what our young people are going through. And the important thing is that as the church stands on the sidelines and kind of looks down on young people for not having their lives together and judging them and feeling like, we could have done so much better. We've got our balloons filled with helium and we're kind of looking down on them. How come we can't get it all together, right? We kind of have some advantages and we're farther along. As the church stands on the sidelines, it's really difficult for those young people to feel like this is a place for them. When we stand back and sort of silently judge or silently criticize or look down on them for the way that their lives are going. A much better approach would be to enter into their lives and really take the time to get to know what they're going through. Okay. So there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about really quick after this. And let me just catch on my slides here. We believe as Christians that God gives us identity, belonging, and purpose. Think about those 3 big questions that these teenagers are going through and thinking about. We believe that God gives us the best sense of purpose, the best sense of identity, the best sense of belonging through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the reason we believe that is because as we read through the scriptures, we see how when people interact with Jesus, when Jesus spends time with people, people are able to find those key things through a relationship with him. And so we're going to read a couple of those moments. Let me just get to the right page on my notes here. We're going to read a couple of those passages, and we're going to focus a lot on how Peter and the disciples spend time with Jesus and find their answers to these questions of identity, belonging, and purpose. So let's take a look at Matthew chapter 4 really quick. As people spend time with Jesus and invest in a relationship with him, we see that the gospel message gives them the answers that they're looking for to those 3 big questions. The first one is in Matthew chapter 4. Starting in verse 18. And it says, "One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, 'Come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people.' And they left their nets at once and followed him." So there's a couple things here going on. As Simon and the others were out fishing, we get the sense that was their full-time job. That was what they did for a living. That was their career. As Jesus showed up, he said, "Come and follow me," which would have been an invitation for these fishermen to come be his disciples. The way that it worked in that Jewish culture is that rabbis would invite certain highly qualified, highly religious, highly educated young pupils to kind of come be their disciples. And you really had to earn that. And the way that the schooling would work is that young Jewish boys would go to school and study the scriptures. And like the best and the brightest ones would kind of go on to the next level where they start like memorizing large portions of the Old Testament, really memorizing maybe even as much as the entire Old Testament, trying to commit that to memory. And if you were one of the best and one of the brightest and kept going in your schooling, you might be invited to become a disciple of a really prominent rabbi. But if you weren't really one of the best and brightest, that was okay because you'd study the scriptures for a little bit and then go like get a job somewhere. Maybe at Chick-fil-A, the Lord's Chicken, or maybe Taco Bell, or maybe you'd go be a fisherman, for example. And so when Jesus shows up and invites Peter, Simon, to be his disciple, it's an indication that Simon was not one of those best and brightest young students that rose to the top of his class. He wasn't the most educated, he wasn't the smartest, he wasn't the most qualified, and there was no other rabbis out there that were really excited about recruiting Simon, Peter, to be their disciple. And so it shows that he was just a pretty average, ordinary guy. And so when Jesus showed up and said, "Come follow me," that's an invitation to be Jesus' disciple, a disciple of the Son of God. And Peter understood what was being asked of him and the offer that was being extended. Because in the parallel passage in Luke, as you see up on the screen in Luke 5:8, Peter says, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man." Peter is struggling with his identity because his culture and his world and everything that he's known about himself is that he's just a worker. He's just average. He's ordinary. He's not extremely religious. He didn't really go far enough or high enough in his education to earn what Jesus is offering. He's saying, "Jesus, no, you got the wrong guy. I'm just a fisherman." And Jesus says, "No, come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." So Jesus is offering Peter this sense of identity, that his identity is no longer defined by maybe the mistakes that he's made in the past or his shortcomings or the fact that he's not a very good student or whatever. It's that God is giving him this grace, the chance to spend with Jesus, to spend his life with Jesus. And so now his identity is wrapped up in Jesus. Jesus is also offering him purpose when he says, "I will show you how to fish for people." He's giving Peter a preview of the incredible impact that he's going to make on the kingdom of God and bringing the gospel to hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people in the Mediterranean world. There's another passage a little bit later. We see how that first passage shows Peter going from a fisherman to a disciple. There's a passage in Luke chapter 6 where Jesus is going to continue that journey for Peter and invite him to go from being a disciple to an apostle. And he says, one day soon, in Luke chapter 6, verse 12, one day soon afterward, Jesus went up on a mountaintop to pray, and he prayed to God all night. At daybreak, he called together all of his disciples and chose 12 of them to be apostles. And a lot of times in the Bible, we use the word disciple and apostle interchangeably, but there's actually two pretty distinct definitions going on there. Jesus had a lot of disciples. There were crowds of disciples that followed him. A disciple is a word that simply means a student, a follower, someone who's closely associated with their teacher. Sometimes in grad school, a particular student might really want to study under a famous or prestigious professor. They kind of want to understand that person's life work and know what they know and kind of be like them. And that's sort of the idea of what it means to be a disciple. You have your teacher, your master that you follow, and you want to try and be like them. And so there was a lot of people that were disciples of Jesus. The word apostle, it comes from a Greek word that means to send someone on a mission. Sometimes it's you send an official envoy to accomplish a particular mission for an authority figure in your life. So a king might send an envoy to another country to accomplish something, and then they come back. So instead of just being sort of, you're known by your master, now your master is giving you an important job that you need to go out and do. You're leaving the comfort zone of following your master, and now you've got a job to do out sort of in the wild, so to speak. And so Peter is on this journey. From first, he's just a fisherman, and God gives him grace and allows him to be a disciple of Jesus. And then Jesus trains him and invests in him and teaches him, and now he's ready to go be an apostle, where he's sent out with the gospel message to go take that good news to other people as well. And so we see Jesus giving him this purpose, strengthening his identity in Christ and giving him this purpose. And we know also that there are 12 apostles, as it says here. And that's kind of like the belonging that Peter has, the sense of community. There would have been, maybe as much as hundreds of disciples following Jesus. But there was this small group of apostles that had their own community. Like-minded people doing life together, serving God together throughout the week, day after day, spending that time together. And so that would be their community. There's other passages too, and we won't read this whole one, but in Matthew 16, Jesus is taking Peter along. First, he's the fisherman, and then he's the disciple, and then he's the apostle. And then in Matthew 16, Jesus says to Peter, you're not just going to be an apostle, you are going to be the rock. And I'm going to change your name. Like your name, it used to be Simon, and the word Simon is he is heard. And now your name is going to be Peter, which means the rock. So you're done just hearing about the good things that God is doing. You're done being on the sidelines, sort of hearing what's happening and watching, and now you're going to be the rock, the foundation that's at the center of all of it. And so you see Jesus strengthening his identity and giving him a larger and larger and a deeper and more meaningful purpose throughout his life. So you're going to get a new name. That's your identity changing. You're going to get a new mission. You're going to be the rock, the foundation of the church. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Which sounds a lot like that idea of keychain leadership, where Jesus is going to entrust Peter with the leadership of the church moving forward. And so what we see in these passages is that as Jesus spends time with these disciples, he's giving them all of the answers to these three ultimate questions that all of us are asking. And we believe that when we ask, who am I? The best possible answer to that is we find it in the grace of God. That we have mistakes in our lives that sometimes we feel define us. Things that we've done wrong or wrong things that have been done to us. And we carry that guilt around and that shame around and feel like I'm a product of my mistakes. But what God is telling us is that when we ask, who am I? That question of identity, it's best answered in the grace of God. I am forgiven by God. I'm given a second chance. And my life is now defined by Jesus instead of my mistakes. When we ask, where do I fit? We believe the best community there is a loving family of believers in the church. That there are people in this room that want to love you, spend time with you, that care about you. There are people in this room that have made a tremendous difference in my life. As I opened up about the struggles that I'm going through, the challenges that I'm facing. And I'm definitely not much of a crier, okay? But there's been times where I've been sort of in tears with people in this room talking about the challenges and the struggles and the things tugging on my heart. And I know that the best place to belong is in the family of God. And we believe that the best purpose, when we ask that question of purpose, what difference do I make? God has given us an amazing chance to take this good news of Jesus and share it with others. We believe the best thing that we can do with our lives is to serve God and make an impact in his kingdom. And so we believe at Westside that God has chosen us, that God wants to use us to be a blessing to kids, teenagers, college students, and young adults. Like that's our desire, is to pass our faith on to this next generation and see people experience the goodness and the joy of a relationship with God. And I think we do have a unique opportunity to be that kind of blessing in the lives of young people. Because as I look around this room, there is so much spiritual wisdom and experience and love and humility represented in the members of this body right here. You know, last week we talked a lot about the incredible things that God is doing through the lives of our young people, through our high school students, college students, young adults. But we know that for every young person who's doing something incredible or amazing in the kingdom of God, there's countless parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, volunteers, spiritual grandparents that have been praying for those students, loving them, teaching them, discipling them, sending them to camps, investing in their spiritual lives. And that's the reason that those students have been able to be, trained and brought along and put in a position where they can do amazing things for God. And so we know that it's our responsibility to keep it up and to keep training and to keep leading. We know that God is offering us the best answers to life's biggest questions. We know that many young people have a really negative experience with the church and with religion. And so we have a unique opportunity to walk alongside young people, to live with empathy, to connect with them so that we can bridge that gap and help younger people experience a deep and meaningful relationship with God. And that sort of brings us to a few faith challenges that we can focus on and sort of grab onto for the rest of our week. The first one is to give and receive grace. That question of identity, who am I, is best answered in the grace of God. And so one of the best things that we can do is, number one, receive God's grace. Because sometimes we have a hard time forgiving ourselves and letting certain things go. We have a hard time believing that God could truly love us or forgive us or accept us after all the things that we've done wrong or all the wrong things that evil people have done to us. And so the first thing is we need to receive the grace of God and allow ourselves to move forward. But we also need to offer grace. We need to give grace. People are going to drop the ball a lot. And it's not always pretty. And it's not always perfect. And so if we want to live with empathy and make a difference in someone's life, we need to be able to give grace. The second one is to show love in community. We feel like that with that question of belonging, where do I fit? It's best answered in Christian community that's built on love. And so we need to find a small group to be a part of, a ministry that we can join, to walk alongside others as we serve God. And as we do that, to love one another. Yes, to offer grace, but to love one another and extend just great relationships with each other. And if you're not too sure where to start with finding a community to be part of, I'd really like to invite you to visit Guest Central right after our services end, particularly if this is one of your first experiences with church or at Westside. And if you bring the In Touch card that's in front of you to Guest Central, and we get a little bit of information from you, we've got a free gift for you, so that's great for you guys. And you can also find out all of the different ministries and small group opportunities that are available. You can also check it out online for that info as well. But we want everyone to show love in community. And last but not least is to live your life on mission. With that question of purpose, what is my purpose? What difference do I make? We know that God is calling all of us to love people to Jesus, to spread his love, to serve our community, to make a difference and an impact right here in Bakersfield. So we know that young people are on a unique journey. They're facing many difficult things in their lives. We know that a relationship with God would be this incredible blessing to them. And the key to leading younger people to Christ and involving them in the church is living with empathy, connecting with them emotionally, seeing life from their point of view, and walking alongside them in their unique journey. As we wrap up our message time right now, we just want to ask you guys, if you have anything on your hearts that you'd like to talk about, pray about, we've got some amazing shepherds in our church that will be available to talk with you. If you would like to dedicate your life to Christ right now, they can pray with you and walk you through the steps of that. But we want to thank you once again for being here and invite you to worship with us and pray with us during this next song.
Let's all stand.